having a family member struggle through chronic illness and pain and fight every day of their life, my whole thing was always, if they can do that, like, I can wake up and do this. And that's kind of where everything that I do on a daily basis, if they can do that, I can do this. If they can carry theirs, I can carry mine. And I couldn't do anything without that. I mean, that's literally what shaped me.
All right, welcome back to the Medical Entrepreneur Podcast. We have an excellent guest with us today. Sunni is here with us. She's going to share her story and kind of her journey becoming a medical entrepreneur and her life path being an entrepreneur.
Hey, guys.
So, Sunni, would you like to tell us a little more about yourself?
Well, I got into nursing. I had my younger brother was born chronically ill, so kind of always spent growing up in the hospitals on the other side. I finally got into nursing. That was why I did it. I knew right away that I didn't want to be a bedside nurse. I wanted to go straight into CRNA. So I did the ICU experience and went straight through school to be a CRNA. I wanted to be able to care for one patient at a time and to be a good bedside nurse. Like, you're spread so thin, like you can't do it. It's nearly impossible to give everybody what they need. So I figured, CRNA would be where I could devote all my attention to one person at one time. So that's kind of where I started and why I got into it. And then a little bit of why I ended up doing aesthetics. I actually started right at COVID. I signed up for the Kelly's Beautify course. I signed up for that in March 2020. And it was crazy. And it was just this thing, like, I realized everything was changing and I knew I didn't want to trade my time for money anymore. I wanted to build something for myself and my family instead of, being somebody else's workhorse and building their business. And I saw this as a way that I could do that for my family. I've never considered myself really an artistic person. So really, like, learning like the facial balancing and all of those things were difficult for me at first. So I spent a lot of time and money and energy trying to just be the best injector that I could be. And then Circle comes, and that actually has completely changed how I look at my business. So that's kind of where I started, and here I am.
That's amazing. And I think it's really important that you realized, you said, a lot of people, like when I talk to a lot of people that are still kind of stuck in the mainstream medical system, they feel like, exactly like you're describing, like you're a workhorse for somebody else. Every day you work, you get your like salary, and then you got to do it again next month,
Mm-hmm.
So you're not building any kind of like long-term asset,
Right.
So I think it was very wise that you're able to identify that. How would you say that, since you started your practice, can you maybe describe like kind of like how was it really scary for you? How did you feel about it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I felt like an imposter for a long time, even after I knew that I was highly equipped and probably better trained than most people out there. I wanted to do mobile and like concierge. I realized very quickly that wasn't going to work for me, if I wasn't all in, I wasn't all in. So then I got a one-room place set up, and I kind of did that for about a year. And then the opportunity came to grow into a larger space. And I have like a 1,200 square foot, like 5-room place. I'm trying to fill it up full time would be my ideal goal. So that's kind of where I started, and it was very scary. But I have a background in sales. Sales has kind of always been just second nature to me, because if you believe it, you can convince anybody of it. It's not selling it if you believe it. Like, if you truly believe in something, you're servicing them. You're not selling them anything. So that's kind of the only portion of this that was kind of easy for me. But I didn't have a lot of supporters. There weren't a lot of fans along the way. So transitioning out of CRNA and into this was definitely difficult.
And it reminds me of the traditional medical entrepreneur journey, where it's like when you first start out, everybody says, you're crazy. What are you doing? Yeah. You can't do that. You should take the conservative route, stay at the hospital. And the thing is that, like, then when you actually do it, then later they're like, oh, wait, you're my friend. Right. So now that you did it, like, now I'm going to jump on the bandwagon.
There's a lot of that. Actually, when I first started and I had my one-room place and I was trying to get all my colleagues to come in and, service them, I got these magnets for my car. And it was like, Botox party, I'll host you, this and that, put my phone number on it. Drove that around every day, for months, nothing, never got one phone call from it. Finally, one day I was just so frustrated. I just ripped it off my car and I was like, all right, forget it. I drove into work the very next day and everybody's like, oh, so I see your magnet's gone. Did your business fail? Is it not working out for you? And I was like, you know what? Actually, I had to take them off because I'm so booked I couldn't handle another person. And that's what I told them. And literally every single person started lining up trying to come in. I made them all wait 3 months. I said, I am booked out 3 months. That is why they came off in my car. And I sat there with barely anything going on for 3 months and made every single one of them wait. And it kind of worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And then now sometimes you have to become the thing that you want to be, like I think there's a lot to that. One of the things that I find most interesting about you, there's so many great things about your personality. You're always positive. Yeah. Like as far as I've seen you, you're always positive. It seems like you can roll with the punches very well, which, a lot of times because of medical training, we're, trained to be these perfectionists. And so when something goes wrong, so many times people are like, oh, I just can't handle it, Like it's either I have to get it perfect or I don't get it at all. And the real world is much different than that. How did you overcome those things like that?
I do struggle with that because as being this, we are type A, we are perfectionists, but I've had a lot of struggle and chaos just in my whole life growing up and in my family. And, it's been a rough road. So you just roll with it. I always count my life by the blessings and not the pain or the hardships that I've had. Every single day is a chance for something else. So that's kind of how I live it.
That is awesome. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was also sales, because so often in medicine, we're not taught any kind of sales at all. You're always taught like, oh, you need to not sugarcoat stuff. You need to just be direct with patients or something to this effect. Sometimes they teach you bedside manner, although even that's kind of going away. What would you say, like from somebody who was initially like a salesperson kind of before you went to nursing, right? Mm-hmm. So you were basically a salesperson and now you're on the medical side. To me, I feel like sales is really critical for everybody to understand, but it sometimes has a bad reputation, Sure. Is there anything that you want to talk about maybe regarding sales in medicine?
I guess so I've had my real estate license since 2003. So a long time. I did real estate. I actually did real estate all the way up until the market crashed in 2008. And that's when I decided I was going back for some security. And that's whenever I went into nursing school. But with sales, I believe it's all in the takeaway. You tell somebody they can't have it and it drives them nuts. They're going to have it. They're going to find a way. And that's what they want. They want that exclusive. They want that, selective. It's only for a few people. Everybody's got FOMO.
Yes, that's really true. Mm-hmm. So takeaway selling is huge. And so often I see people, medicine, especially when you're first starting out, you're just so worried about getting the sale at all.
Exactly.
you kind of bend over backwards and then people take advantage of you,
Well, people, they smell blood in the water. If they can smell the fear on you or the need, that's whenever I always found that I did the worst in sales is whenever I had to sell. I had to do it because otherwise my bills weren't getting paid. People, they recognize that. So if you can go into it and, just shrug that part off and figure out how to speak to them without that fear of losing the sale, then I think that's where you're really going to capitalize on it. If you can get in the mindset that there's going to be another client, if it's not this one, the next one's going to come in and get it from you. You don't have to have this one. Then I think that'll really help you. So that's kind of how I do it. There's always somebody else that's going to take it if you're not.
And so since you made the jump from basically being a hospital employee to, imagine I guess I never asked you, were you actually a hospital employee, like a W-2?
Yep, I was W-2. I've been PRN since October last year, I went PRN. And actually, this is my first month that I'm doing absolutely zero anesthesia.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. And then would you say that now as owning your own business, do you can you talk about maybe how that has changed your life, your schedule, anything that, anything that somebody, I guess if someone was listening to this and they were, we have a lot of people listen to it and they're, nurse practitioners, CRNAs, medical doctors, chiropractors, et cetera. And they, maybe they're on the fence and they're working for someone else and they're like, man, should I pull the trigger? Should I not? Any words of advice you might have for someone like that?
I work harder than I ever did in the hospital. I mean, for me, I do. because I'm working on the business end of it. I'm working on building something that's going to be my retirement, something that's going to pay me when as a passive person where I'm not in a treatment room. That is my goal for my med spa, not to be an injector, to be the CEO of the company and to be passive. So now I'm working harder than I ever did. I mean, when I did anesthesia, yeah, I worked hard for those 40 hours, but I clocked out, I went home, I didn't think about it. That's not the case with this. This is always something that I'm pouring more into. And so while it may be harder now, I know that in the future for my family, this is what I'm building for them.
I know, like, for me, I've always worked harder building a business, but sometimes I think back, or, sometimes I'll think back to the time where, like, I had like a job, like I never even went W-2 because I didn't want to have even that much control over me. Mm-hmm. But like I did 1099. And I remember thinking, like, I could be working on my business and building something, or I could be doing like, something else, right? Like, what would most people do? And, I looked at it and it's like, we could be watching TV, watching a rerun you've already seen, like going out to eat again. Like, you look at it, it's like, wow, there's really not, like, to me, there's not that much more stuff that I would want to do anyway, mm-hmm. because it's like, at least you have some focus and so passion, because so much of our life is defined by our purpose. Right. And, if you don't really have a purpose, your purpose is, hey, I work my 40 hours and then whatever they give me off as my free time is what my life is in. And so often, like, you don't really have much of a life either. It's like you watch Game of Thrones 3 times, like, did you really need to watch it that many times? That kind of thing. Any more advice to someone who is maybe a CRNA, they're at the hospital, they're doing Q3, they're getting burned out, they don't like the negative environment, they're looking for some way to get control over their life and schedule. What advice would you have for someone like that?
I mean, if you're thinking about it, you have nothing to lose to venture off into it. You don't have to, rip the Band-Aid off right at the beginning. You can always, figure out and reach out to people. That's the beautiful thing about this community. I mean, if we've built a community, I mean, you guys have built a community, and it's really nice to have the support. There's so many different avenues and resources for people who are thinking about doing it. Reaching out to you and Jennifer and Kelly, it's just been a great thing to have.
Oh, thank you so much. That's such a compliment. One of the things I see a lot is people, they go into medicine and they're kind of like almost identified early. I don't know if this happened to you. Like, maybe you're a nurse and they're like, wow, you're really intelligent. Maybe you should be a CRNA or something like this. And you're kind of like selected out to do these things. And then you get there and it's like, whoa, I'm just basically doing this kind of algorithm over and over. And I don't have any creativity. Like, I'm not growing every day. Like, I'm just kind of doing the same thing. How do you feel like your life has changed in terms of that kind of growth since you've had your own business?
So, I mean, yes, that always happened to me. You were, always identified as like a person that they could get more out of. But for me, coming from my background in sales into nursing, I always identified that as them giving me more work for the same pay. So my answer was always no. My first answer to 99% of anything that anybody ever asks me is no. Because then I can stop, I can think about it, whether it's going to benefit me, whether it's going to benefit my family, whether it's good for what it is that I see for myself. And if it doesn't, then the answer stays no. If it turns out that, yeah, it might not be such a bad thing, then you can go back and say yes. And then you get all the glory for saying yes. You never get the glory for saying yes the first time. So I always say no the first time to everything.
So, Sunny, that is gold. That is gold. Like, I don't think you realize it. That's so true. And I remember Ross Perot once said something like that too. Ross Perot was the CEO of EDS Systems, which is like a multi-billion-dollar company. And he always said, initially, when you have nothing, you're supposed to say yes. But then once you start to get something, the most important thing you can say is no. The most important word you can know is no. So I think you nailed that one right out the gate.
It's worked for me. Job. That's really, the answer is always no until I give it some thought and decide, how it benefits me.
That's really smart. Mm-hmm. How do you feel like, do you feel like you have a creative outlet now that you have a business as well?
I like it because it's challenging, right? Like, everything in my life is, I don't find it interesting unless it's challenging. Like, it doesn't give me purpose, or it doesn't like make me want to work harder. If it's easy, then I'm not interested in it. And I've definitely found this challenging. I know that I am my own limiting factor, like literally the only thing that can limit my growth and what I'm going to perform in the day is myself. So I love that about this. I only have myself to blame when it doesn't work out, but then tomorrow comes and you get a new chance. Action has been very important to me too, because I can sit and plan and go through the videos and listen to the coaching and, do the appointments, and I can make these big elaborate plans. But if I'm not taking the action on them, then it means nothing. So whenever you mentioned about the 7 perfect decisions and like hundreds of other imperfect decisions, like that really resonated with me. That's something that I need to work on. And I'm okay. I'm just going to start throwing it out there and seeing what sticks.
That's a really good point. And so that's a life lesson I had to learn as well. Cause so often you especially, I feel like our training really in some ways hampers us, or almost makes us better to be a little, bold, maybe makes us better slaves because, like many times, if you look at the hospitals, they don't want you to try new things. They don't want you to do anything. You do what they say. You do, do your pay. Do what, you get your pay. You're only going to get this much. Don't try to make extra. If you make too much, then you're greedy. If you work too many hours, then you're abnormal. That kind of thing. And I just feel like it was such a limiting factor. And then just like when you go out to the real world, there is no perfectionism. It's just like whatever you can get done, you can get done. And so often, many, many times, you don't need to be even close to perfect to win. Like you can get like a 70% accomplishment and still win, like sure, you can make it better, that's for sure in the future. But, it's so opposite of what we're kind of almost trained to think, at least from a lot of our academic things,
Absolutely.
One of the things I see a lot with our medical colleagues is that, we have highest level of physician suicides. We got highest level of CRNA suicides. We got highest level of nurse suicides. We got highest level of, and I would say all providers abusing drugs, alcohol. Like these things are reaching all-time highs in almost every asset of medicine, right? They measure physicians a lot, but I mean, it's everywhere, like PAs, MPs, you name it. Would you maybe talk about how you use your mindset to navigate the world? And also imagine like maybe you could tie it even into, or I'm not sure if you thought about this, but a lot of people that are excellent at sales, like you were in the beginning, you have a certain resiliency because you've had to deal with rejection, from sales. Could you maybe talk about, some of the things that you use for mindset or things that maybe you've learned along the path?
Yeah, sure. So with me, whenever I lost sales, it was always just next. That was just the very first thing that always popped in my head. It was next, there's going to be another one. And as far as like resiliency and just how my mindset has helped keep me forward, mental health is like a huge thing now. And I honestly never saw it until recently. It's something I never identified with or understood what people were going through. Even in my own family, I didn't identify it now until more recently. And I can look and see that, that's not just, we used to make excuses for them, right? But like now you can look and see like, okay, there was like literally a real issue there. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work out well for them. I never understood it. Me, myself, having a family member struggle through chronic illness and pain and fight every day of their life. My whole thing was always, if they can do that, like I can wake up and do this. And that's kind of where everything that I do on a daily basis, if they could do that, I can do this. If they can carry theirs, I can carry mine. And I couldn't do anything without that. I mean, that's literally what shaped me.
Wow, that is beautiful. You can tell you're very passionate about it too. That's amazing. I think, the one thing I find about you all the time is that like, and Jennifer actually kind of tipped me off to this, but like she was saying, for the longest time I mispronounced her name, so I apologize again for that. I kept calling you Sunni instead of Sunny, so like, sorry about that. But one of the things that she always said is like Sunny's like the sun. She's always shining. She's always happy. She's always positive. And I thought, man, like that kind of like high energy, high, some people might say like high vibrational state, high, like trying to focus on your happiness, like taking a look at the world and realizing, hey, there's negatives and positives, and it's up to me to decide whether to look at the negative and positives. I think you're a master of without you kind of knowing. It's like, the whole progression of like education is like you're unconsciously incompetent, then you're like consciously incompetent, and then you become like, the whole thing where you eventually get to a point where you're like unconsciously competent. Like, I think that's where you have your mindset now, is that you're pretty much always happy. Like, you're always positive. And I was curious to see, like, did you find that when you were happier and positive, that it helped with your ability to sell and accomplish a like task? Did you find that there was a state dependent relationship like that?
One thing that I really recognized with that, like always being a positive person, and I've never in my life really compared myself to other people. It's not something that I've typically done. I've never been a jealous person or, looked at what I have, what they have. And however, until I got into this business, right, then you start looking around and you're like, oh my goodness, well, look what they're doing. And, there's 10 other med spas within 5 miles of me and, things like that. Like that was something new for me to not so much like focus just on myself, but kind of start seeing what other people were doing. That kind of held me down a little bit, I had to get out of that mindset and break away from that. I'm like, that's not healthy for me. Not comparing myself. Everybody comes to different people for different reasons. And my clients are going to be my clients versus the person that's a mile down the road from me going to be their clients. So really, in breaking away from the comparing thing, comparing my practice and my services to other people right down the street. I believe that, the tide rises all ships. So I think that one thing that I did that really ended up working out for me and helping me break that cycle of looking at other people, I made friends with somebody who owns a med spa, like the closest one to me, like a mile down the street. Kind of similar size practice, similar type of services. And, I've made a real, true, genuine friend in her. We talk about things. I love her social media. I'm constantly building her up. I've even told people about her. She has a laser. I don't have a laser. Whereas coming from like, the cutthroat sales background that I had, that's something I never would have done before. So I think pulling from that and then bringing it into this is kind of like a marriage between the two things. Like I'm not either thing, hard and fast. Like you just kind of got to look at what you bring to the table and try to present it in, the best way you can for people.
And so would you say that you feel more like the community over competition is kind of like a principle that you adhere to, or?
I do. I definitely do. Because I want to see other people do well. When I see them do well, it makes me smile. Like, I enjoy, other people's happiness. And I know that mine will come, if I'm not having it in this moment, I will have mine.
You are 100% right. And this one thing I tell people, like, and this is something I had to learn myself, was like, so often I was, even when I built my first practice, I was like always looking at other people like, oh, they got a practice. How many patients they have? Like, how can I get more? Like kind of very, very competitive,
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized over time was, one, even with everybody, if everybody doubled the size of their business, like if you actually measure the market size, like it's not like even you can look at this in like huge markets, like for example, Apple Computer, like the actual computers of Apple, I think they're like something like 13% of the market only. But like everybody I know has a Mac, like I'm using a Mac right now. You may be using Mac, I think you're using an iPad,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so I mean, like you're using Mac, but yet they're only 13% of the market. So there's even more market space for them to dominate, even though they're as famous as they are, right? And so one of the things I realized was that it's not so much the other people around you that are ever holding you down, but it's the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to be happy for someone else's success if you're ever going to achieve that success yourself. And that's one thing I see with people, especially with money, is like they will have a mindset where they're like, oh, I really want to be wealthy. I really want to be rich. And then like as soon as they see a wealthy or rich person, they say, that horrible person, they must have cheated. They must have stolen. They must be a drug dealer. That kind of thing. Is like, wait a minute, if you say that, then how are you going to be wealthy? Because if you believe those things, and then, basically you're programming yourself to never be wealthy, right? And it's the same kind of deal with competition. So I think, for me, like I feel like you have to celebrate wins, even in your biggest enemy, because those wins, if you celebrate them, allows you to achieve them as well. If every time you see somebody who's reaching the thing you don't want and you're like, oh, they're horrible, they should have never done that, well, how are you in your mind going to justify it when you succeed,
Absolutely. I 100% believe that. And I'm like huge on positive self-talk. Like I will never, ever speak anything negative over my life. You won't hear it come out of my mouth. It just won't happen because your brain is a very powerful thing and it believes what it hears. I have my kids, my son was struggling in 6th grade. I wrote out a positive affirmation with him and we went through them every single day. You have to speak positive words over your life because that's what your mind believes.
Oh, that is so true. And I mean, I don't know. Did you ever have the experience in anesthesia where you've actually put someone like a hypnotic state and then said stuff to them and like see if they remember it?
No. I need to go back and do some more anesthesia, I think.
Oh, I got really lucky in my training because apparently back in the 70s, there was like, they used to allow dentists to go from dentist to become an anesthesiologist. And then they stopped this later. So there was a guy who was actually a dentist, like a full blown like DDS. And then this, back in like whatever the 60s or 70s, they had a pathway for them to go into anesthesia. And so this guy was just like kind of like a renegade dude. Like he just did whatever he wanted to do. He was an older guy at the hospital, and I was lucky enough to rotate with him. And so we were able to do all sorts of weird stuff that you normally never get to do. Like we would put people under to anesthesia, and we'd induce different states, put EEGs on them. And that's when I first saw how powerful hypnosis was. And actually, the guy actually made me do a whole bunch of research before I started to work with him. He said, you need to go research and read about all the hypnotic stuff that was done like in the 1800s, where there's like documented cases of like 5,500 patients who had orchiectomies, not exactly a painless procedure, right? You know, cutting the testicles off, right? You know, like very, very painful procedure. Like 5,000 patients documented had the surgery with only hypnosis, only someone hypnotizing them. Now, the downside is it takes like an hour to like induce hypnosis through like, you know, non-pharmacological means. So it's not really practical, you know? Yeah. So, but when we started to test people, we started to use different medications. And then we would say like, you know, a certain phrase or something like, hey, remember this? Or like when we start to, you know, inject like propofol in the IV, which normally burns, you know, he's like, you're going to feel cold in your arm. And the guy was like, I'm going to feel cold in my arm. It was the coolest thing I ever saw. And so what I took away from that was how much we don't appreciate that in our own life. Because when we're conscious, many people are saying stuff that is horrible to themselves. They treat themselves very poorly. You know, they say stuff, you know, I even hate saying it out loud now, you know, I'm dumb. I can't do this, that kind of stuff. They program themselves for negative. And I think you hit on something 100% accurate. Like in order to be a winner, in order to be successful, in order to be the top 5%, if anybody should be a cheerleader for you, it should be you, right? So that is like another Sunny Gold moment right there. Sunny Golden Nugget. That is so awesome. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you know, you were trained in anesthesia as a CRNA. You obviously have a great skill set in that. You then did some training with Beautify Academy and Kelly, and you're able to kind of learn how to do Botox, fillers, and PRP microneedling, right? Mm-hmm. How did you find the difficulty of going from being a CRNA to doing aesthetics? Did you find it to be much more technically difficult, or would it, because of your skill set, it was fairly easy?
The actual work of it was very easy. You know, I mean, whenever you do nerve blocks and spinal anesthesia and epidural, I mean, putting a tiny little insulin needle in somebody's face is nothing. The part that really held me back, though, was like understanding like the vascular anatomy and like the vascular, you know, I think we're smart enough to know what we don't know and to know that the whole face is a roadmap full of like veins and arteries and that I'm putting stuff in them constantly. That part was frustrating for me. It still is something that I'm highly in tune to. And if you saw my VO kit, you'd laugh at me. But so that was the most difficult part. The actual doing it, putting needles in people's faces, doing the Botox and things like that. That's all easy.
And how do you feel about the whole experience as a provider? I just remember one time I was at the hospital and I worked on this guy. And so I was putting it in a spinal cord stimulator. It's like a little, almost like an epidural lead, but it's made of metal. It generates energy field, right? So basically it's like an epidural lead. And I remember it took like 3 hours because the guy had like cervical stenosis and we were putting his neck. And I got done and the guy's like, hey, doc, thanks, you know, and I got a warning from the radiology department saying like, hey, dude, you just took a ton of radiation, you know, because it took so long. So I was like, you know, you need to back off on your procedures for a while until you can heal, you know. And I was thinking like, okay, cool. Like I basically did all this work and at least the guys helped. And then the same day, Jennifer had a patient and the patient saw her, I think it was for Botox or filler. And the lady gave her like a Louis Vuitton bag, you know, and I was just like, what a difference, you know? Do you find that there's a lot of difference between your kind of patient experience now that you're doing aesthetics versus when you were in the hospital, you know, treating people that are going to surgery and these kind of things?
It is a different experience. I've kind of always been like I said earlier, like I wanted to treat each client, each patient one at a time so I could, you know, pour into that person. I feel like with the anesthesia, you know, it's a thankless job, and it's a job where if nobody knows your name, then you did a good job. Like I don't want to be remembered. I don't want my name out there. I know that I did the best for them, and that makes me feel good. This is different. People are constantly texting me and sending me things. Somebody shouted me out on Facebook this morning. So I've been told I look 10 years younger than I am 3 times today. So,
that's awesome.
Things like that is, it's really nice. That's something I've never had before. So getting that constant reinforcement from people and how happy they are with the things that I'm providing for them, it's different.
And I've got to say, so basically today, someone put a post to you on Facebook saying that they've been told 3 times today they look 10 years younger because of your treatments, right? What an incredible result that you delivered. I mean, just think about the time that we all put epidurals in labor, right. So often you don't hear anything. It's not like a thank you or anything. It's like, all right, get the catheter out. We're done. But here is somebody who's you made such a profound difference in their life. I mean, even more than I would say some of the stuff we do in anesthesia.
Yeah.
Not that you can really compare perhaps, but to me, that's just I don't know what it is, but it's so much. It's almost like the difference between sick care and well care. You're treating people who want to get better versus sometimes you're treating people who have to do things,
Right.
It's like the guy who goes in for the cysto at midnight. He doesn't really want to be there either, but he has to. Well, that's awesome. Any other tips or tricks that you might want to share with anyone who's considering going into aesthetics or even just considering starting their own medical entrepreneur business?
I mean, you really don't have anything to lose. I mean, if you see it, if you could see yourself doing it, if you believe that you can do it, if you can put the time in that it requires, and be dedicated to it, I believe you'll succeed. Do it. And then something that I always, whenever I run into roadblocks in this, if I'm, when I'm having a challenging day, week, month, whatever it is, something that I know Jennifer's big on quotes, so am I. I'm a huge quote person. But one of the ones that I always tell myself is whenever you get to the end of your rope, you tie a knot and you hang on. So
that's a great quote. I like it.
Yeah.
How do you think that one of the things I'm kind of seeing, and I'm seeing this from a lot of people, especially, people that are kind of in the larger hospital systems, but it seems like the work and the quality of life providing what we consider traditional medicine is decreasing over time. So if you look at the 90s, people got paid really, really well for wasn't a terrible amount of hours. Now it seems like the hours are increasing and the pay is either stagnant. In many cases, for example, in pain management, you would get paid more to do pain management procedures in the 90s than you do today, yeah. Even though the value of the dollar has gone down so much because of inflation, right? So it's kind of, I'm seeing more and more that people that are kind of stuck in traditional medicine, they have no control over their own pricing because it's essentially set by the government through Medicare. You can charge your own prices. Do you feel that you have more freedom to make your own money now that you can do that? Or do is there any difference that you feel from being in something that's kind of out of your control, just do the thing versus now you have control of everything? Right.
Well, I actually, funny enough, today I went and made that package for the top 1% that you said. So I put a $8,000 package on my my little service sheet today. So,
man, perfect.
We'll see.
You'll get someone for sure. I promise you. It's only a matter of time. That is so awesome. Well, I guess if any last minute things you want to share regarding any of the journey of being a medical entrepreneur or anything else you could think that someone might want to know.
Just surround yourself with people that are going to support you. Believe that you can put the time and the effort into it that it requires. And just jump.
That is so true. That's, now that you mention it, it's actually a really good point. Because I remember when I first started medical school, I tried to do everything on my own. I was very kind of like a lone wolf kind of guy, I studied on my own, did everything, and I had a very competitive mindset. So I was always, they grade you on a curve. So, top so many people get, A's, so it's kind of a competitive environment in a way. And then what I realized was that there was so much reading and so much stuff that the people that did the best were people that were in groups. And it was only because of the group. And you had to be very selective who you put in your group, because you put somebody who was just lazy or crazy, they would just waste your time, right? But those people that had groups that were functioning, they outperformed everyone else like by a huge margin because, we would have to read, I don't know, I think it was like 230 pages a day or something. These are dense, medical textbooks. And so you had a group of 4 people, they could each divide and take a part of it, read it, make notes, and then teach the others. And it like made your work so much easier. If you try to do it all on your own, it was like almost impossible. And I just remember like thinking, wow, we have a saying, right? Like your net worth is related to your network, right?
Absolutely.
So having that network is really critical. That's a very good point. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Sunni, for coming on to the Medical Entrepreneur Podcast. I really appreciate it. It's so many great, I call them Sunni nuggets of gold. So, so many good pieces of wisdom.
I'll take the role.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you.